I never thought I'd discover my own invisibility at 58, standing in my marble foyer while holding an invoice for my husband's 60th birthday party. The cream-colored paper trembled in my hands as I read the elegant script. Payment. Received in full. V. Harrington. $25,000 from my inheritance account. $25,000 for a celebration I wasn't invited to attend. Jackson's voice drifted from his study, animated and warm as he spoke to someone on the phone about Saturday night's festivities. It's going to be perfect, Delilah. Just remember what I told you about the guest list. But what could a wife of 32 years have done to deserve such careful exclusion from her own husband's milestone celebration? What had I become in his eyes that made my presence so unwelcome at an event I had unknowingly funded? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the plantation shutters of our Ansonborough home, casting familiar shadows across the hardwood floors I'd walked for nearly 3 decades. I set my coffee cup on the antique mahogany table, a wedding gift from Jackson's grandmother, and studied the invoice again, as if the elegant script might rearrange itself into something less devastating. Charleston mornings had always been my sanctuary. The city awakened slowly here, with the grace of old money and older secrets. Magnolia trees perfumed the air outside our wraparound porch, and the distant sound of horse-drawn carriages reminded tourists and locals alike that some things remained beautifully unchanged. But sitting in my silk robe at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, holding proof of my husband's betrayal, I felt anything but unchanged. I had been Veronica Sinclair once, before I became a Harrington. 26 years old, fresh from Savannah, College of Art and Design, with a master's degree in art history, and dreams of curating exhibitions that would make people weep with beauty. I'd landed a position at the Gibbes Museum, specializing in Southern contemporary art, when I met Jackson at a gallery opening in 1991. He was 31 then, devastatingly handsome in that effortless Southern way, with sun-streaked hair and eyes the color of sweet tea. "You're the one who arranged this exhibition," he'd said, approaching me near a particularly striking piece by a local artist. His confidence was magnetic, but it was his genuine appreciation for the artwork that caught my attention. "I've been to a dozen gallery openings, but this is the first time I've actually wanted to buy something." That was Jackson then. Curious, engaged, respectful of my expertise. We talked for hours that night about art, about Charleston's cultural renaissance, about his dreams of developing properties that would honor the city's architectural heritage rather than destroy it. When he asked me to dinner the following weekend, I said yes without hesitation. Our courtship unfolded like a Southern romance novel. He courted me properly, meeting my parents, bringing flowers, opening car doors. We shared lazy Sunday afternoons walking through the historic district, planning our future over shrimp and grits at Slightly Mabel's. Jackson was building his real estate company then, focused on high-end residential properties, and he valued my aesthetic input on everything from paint colors to landscape design. We married in December 1992 at St. Philip's Church, the same church where my grandparents had exchanged vows 50 years earlier. I wore my grandmother's pearls and carried white camellias, Jackson's favorite flower. The reception was elegant but intimate, held at the Ocean House on Rainbow Row. In our wedding photographs, we look impossibly young and hopeful, Jackson's arm around my waist, my head tilted toward his shoulder, both of us gazing at the camera with the confidence of people who believed love would be enough. The silver-framed portrait still sat on our mantelpiece, though I couldn't remember the last time either of us had looked at it directly. The twins arrived in 1995, Miles first, then Clara 6 minutes later, as if she'd been politely waiting her turn. Jackson was a devoted father in those early years, coaching Miles's little league team and never missing Clara's dance recitals. He insisted I take a leave of absence from the museum, promising it would be temporary, just until the children were older. "You can always go back to your career," he said. "But they'll only be little once." I believed him. I believed many things. Then, instead of returning to the museum, I found myself managing our increasingly complex household finances. Jackson's business was growing rapidly, but Southern gentlemen of his generation often viewed money management as too mundane for their attention. So I balanced the books, researched investments, and quietly began building our financial security. What started as temporary assistance became my unofficial career. I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of money that surprised us both. While Jackson focused on acquiring properties and schmoozing clients at the country club, I researched mutual funds, studied market trends, and made careful, strategic investments. When my father passed in 2003, I inherited not just his modest savings, but also his small portfolio of stocks he'd accumulated over 40 years as a high school principal. I rolled that inheritance into more aggressive investments, watching our nest egg grow substantially. Jackson praised my domestic talents at dinner parties, always with a patronizing smile that made my teeth ache. "Ronnie keeps us all organized," he'd say, patting my hand like I was a well-trained pet. "I don't know how she does it, managing the house and the kids and somehow making our money multiply. It's like having a personal secretary and accountant all in one." The guests would laugh politely, and I would smile and change the subject, but something inside me withered a little more each time. By the time Miles and Clara left for college, Miles to Duke, Clara to Emory, I had quietly accumulated nearly $2 million in various investment accounts, separate from Jackson's business assets. I told myself it was our security, our children's future, our retirement fund. But deep down, I was building myself a life raft, though I didn't yet understand why I might need one. Jackson's 50th birthday had been a modest affair. Dinner at Peninsula Grill with close friends and family. For his 55th, we'd hosted a cocktail party in our garden, maybe 40 people. Elegant but relaxed. But this year, his 60th, he'd been planning something elaborate for months. "It's a milestone, Ronnie," he'd said when I questioned the expense. "I want to celebrate properly." When Delilah Tran contacted me 3 weeks ago about payment arrangements, I'd assumed Jackson had simply given her my information as the family's financial manager. It made sense. I handled all our major expenditures from the children's college, tuition to our vacation homes. Her boutique event planning company, Magnolia Affairs, specialized in what she called distinctive Southern celebrations, and her portfolio was impressive. "Mrs. Harrington, I wanted to confirm the payment schedule we discussed," she'd said during our phone conversation. Her voice was professional but warm, with just a hint of an accent that suggested she wasn't Charleston-born. "The deposit of 10,000 is due by the 15th, with the balance due the week of the event." "Of course," I'd replied, making notes in my planner. "And the final count is 65 guests." "That's correct." Mr. Harrington was very specific about the guest list. He said to keep it exclusive, sophisticated, the kind of people who would appreciate the champagne selection and the jazz quartet. I'd been pleased by Jackson's attention to detail. It was refreshing to see him invest in something beyond his business dealings. The invoice in my hands told a different story entirely. $25,000 for an exclusive celebration paid in full from my personal account. The account Jackson had never bothered to ask about because he assumed it contained modest household savings. The same account that held my inheritance, my careful investments, my secret financial independence. I walked to the living room and stood before our wedding portrait. The silver frame was tarnished now, despite the housekeeper's careful polishing. In the photograph, Jackson's hand rested possessively on my waist, but his smile was genuine, unguarded. I looked radiant in my grandmother's lace, my dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, my eyes bright with possibility. What had happened to that woman? When had I become someone whose presence at her own husband's birthday party was so unwelcome that he would specifically instruct the planner to exclude me? I heard Jackson's shower running upstairs, his morning routine as predictable as sunrise. Coffee at 7, shower at 7:45, dressed and out the door by 8:30 for his standing breakfast meeting at the Charleston Place Hotel. He would kiss my cheek perfunctorily, comment on the weather, and leave without asking about my day. It was a routine we'd perfected over years of polite indifference. But this morning felt different. This morning, I held evidence of my own irrelevance, paid for with money he didn't even know I possessed. I returned to the kitchen and opened my laptop, logging into our investment accounts. The numbers stared back at me. $147,000 in various portfolios, all managed by me, all grown from careful research and strategic timing. Jackson's name wasn't on any of these accounts. He'd never asked to be added, never shown interest in the details of our financial security beyond signing tax returns I prepared. The irony was devastating. The man who found my presence so unwelcome at his 60th birthday party was celebrating with money I'd earned, invested, and grown over 2 decades of financial stewardship he'd never bothered to understand or acknowledge. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Mom, are you excited about Dad's party? I can't wait to see what you've planned." I stared at the message, my throat tightening. Even my own daughter assumed I was involved in the celebration, that I was the architect of her father's big night. How could I explain that I'd been deliberately excluded from an event I'd unknowingly funded? Another text appeared, this one from Miles. "Hey, Mom, do you need help with anything for Saturday? I know these big parties stress you out. My children's assumption that I was central to their father's celebration made the betrayal even more acute. They knew me as the family organizer, the one who managed every birthday, anniversary, and holiday gathering. The idea that Jackson would plan a major celebration without me was so foreign to them that they couldn't conceive of it. I closed the laptop and walked back to the wedding portrait. 32 years of marriage, and I had become invisible to the man who once couldn't take his eyes off me. But perhaps invisibility had its advantages. Perhaps being overlooked meant I could see things clearly for the first time in years. The shower stopped running upstairs. Soon Jackson would appear in the kitchen, impeccably dressed in one of his custom suits, smelling of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. He would kiss my cheek, comment on the beautiful morning, and leave for his day of important meetings and power lunches, never suspecting that his carefully planned exclusive celebration was built on the foundation of his wife's invisible contributions. But I knew. For the first time in years, I truly knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. The question now was what I intended to do with that knowledge. Jackson appeared in the kitchen at exactly 8:25, as predictable as clockwork. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit pressed to perfection. He smelled of sandalwood and ambition, the same cologne he'd worn for 15 years. Once I'd found that scent intoxicating. Now it seemed cloying, performative. "Beautiful morning," he said, pecking my cheek with the efficiency of a man checking an item off, his to-do list. Coffee smells good. I poured him a cup in his favorite mug, a simple white ceramic piece we'd bought during our honeymoon in Savannah. Such a modest beginning for what had become an elaborate performance of marriage. "Jackson," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to ask you about Saturday night." He paused with the mug halfway to his lips. "What about it?" "Delilah contacted me about the final payment. $25,000 is quite a bit for a birthday party." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the way it did when he was calculating how much truth a situation required. "Well, it's not every day a man turns 60. I wanted something memorable." "Of course. I just wondered about the guest list. She mentioned it was exclusive." Jackson set down his mug and straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed over the years. "Ronnie, you know how these things are. Business associates, potential investors. It's as much about networking as celebrating." "I see." I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was hammering. "So it's more of a business function than a personal celebration." "Exactly." Relief flickered across his face. "You understand how important these relationships are. The waterfront project depends on maintaining the right connections." I nodded slowly. The waterfront project, Jackson's latest development venture, a luxury condominium complex overlooking Charleston Harbor. He'd been courting investors for months, hosting golf games and dinner parties, all in service of securing the funding he needed. "Will the children be there?" I asked. "Of course. Miles and Clara wouldn't miss their father's 60th birthday." He glanced at his Rolex, another gift I'd purchased with money he didn't know I had. "I really should get going. Breakfast meeting with the Hamilton group." He kissed my cheek again and headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Ronnie, you might want to make plans for Saturday evening. Maybe call that book club of yours. I know how you ladies love your wine and gossip nights." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. Not only was I unwelcome at his celebration, but he was actively encouraging me to be elsewhere, as if my absence needed to be managed and orchestrated. "I'll think about something." I managed after he left. I sat in the silence of our kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of our affluent life. The marble countertops I'd selected, the custom cabinets I'd designed, the antique chandelier I'd found, at an estate sale in Beaufort. Every detail of this house reflected my taste, my vision, my careful attention to creating a home worthy of the family we'd built together. But apparently, I wasn't worthy of celebrating the man who lived in this house I'd created. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Delilah Tran's contact information. Her business card was tucked into my wallet, cream-colored stock with elegant gold embossing that read, "Magnolia Affairs, Distinctive Southern Celebrations." I'd kept it because I admired the quality, the attention to detail. Now it felt like evidence of my own naivety. I dialed her number, my hands steadier than they'd been all morning. "Magnolia Affairs. This is Delilah speaking." "Hello, Delilah. This is Veronica Harrington. I wanted to follow up on a few details about Saturday's event." "Mrs. Harrington, of course. I'm so excited about your husband's party. Everything is coming together beautifully. The venue is stunning, and the catering will be exceptional." "The venue. Remind me which location we selected?" I asked, though I knew I hadn't been part of any venue selection process. "The Historics. Rice Mill, of course." When Mr. Harrington showed me the space, I knew immediately it was perfect. The exposed brick, the harbor views, the way the evening light filters through those industrial windows. It's going to be magical. The historic rice mill. I knew the building well. a beautifully restored 19th century structure that had been converted into an event space 5 years ago. What Delilah didn't know, what Jackson apparently didn't know, was that I owned it. My great-uncle Samuel had purchased the crumbling building in 1987 as an investment property. When he died in 2010, he left it to me in his will, along with a modest trust fund for its maintenance and restoration. I'd hired architects, contractors, and designers to transform it into Charleston's most sought-after event venue, managing every detail of the renovation, while Jackson focused on his own business interests. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Jackson had chosen to celebrate his 60th birthday, excluding his wife, in a venue his wife owned but didn't know she'd selected. Mrs. Harrington, are you still there? Yes, sorry. I was just thinking about the logistics. The guest list is final at 65 people. That's correct. Mr. Harrington was very specific about keeping it intimate. He said, and I quote, "I want people there who truly matter to my future, not just my past." The words hit me like ice water. People who matter to his future, not his past. 32 years of marriage, and I was apparently his past. Irrelevant, forgettable, worthy of exclusion. "I see," I said, though I didn't see it all. I didn't understand how the man who'd once promised to love me forever could speak about me as if I were a discarded chapter in his life story. "He also mentioned that you might be out of town this weekend," Delilah continued. "A girls' trip or something?" He seemed pleased that the timing worked out so well. Out of town. Jackson had told the event planner I'd be out of town, as if my absence were planned and mutual rather than a deliberate exclusion he'd orchestrated. Actually, Delilah, I need to be honest with you about something. Jackson hasn't mentioned any details about this party to me. In fact, I'm getting the impression that I'm not invited. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably. Long. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm not sure what to say. When we discussed the arrangements, Mr. Harrington was very clear about the guest list. He said it was business-focused, that you preferred to avoid those kinds of gatherings." "He said I preferred to avoid them?" "Yes. He mentioned that you found his business associates boring, that you'd be happier spending the evening with your own friends." Another fabrication. I'd never expressed any such preference. In fact, over the years, I'd often asked Jackson to include me more in his business social events, only to be told they were too political or too boring for someone with my interests. "Delilah, can I ask you something directly? Am I invited to my husband's 60th birthday party?" Another pause, and when she spoke, her voice was careful, professional. "Mrs. Harrington, I think this might be a conversation you need to have with your husband." That's what I thought. I closed my eyes, the full reality of the situation settling over me like a shroud. "Thank you for your honesty. Mrs. Harrington, if I may. I've been planning events for 8 years, and I've never encountered a situation quite like this. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding..." "There's no misunderstanding," I interrupted. "My husband doesn't want me at his party. The only misunderstanding was mine, thinking I mattered enough to be included." I ended the call and sat in my kitchen, staring at Delilah's business card. The gold embossing caught the morning light. Elegant and refined. Exactly the kind of quality I'd always appreciated, and Jackson had always taken for granted. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Odessa. "Sugar, how are the party preparations going? I can't wait to see you all dressed up for Jackson's big night." Aunt Odessa! At 83, she was the family matriarch, the keeper of wisdom and family stories. She'd never particularly warmed to Jackson, though she'd been too polite to say. so directly. Her messages always carried an undercurrent of concern, disguised as casual interest. I typed back, "There might be a change of plans. Can I come by this afternoon?" Her response was immediate. "Always, baby girl. I'll put the kettle on." I looked around my kitchen, my beautiful, perfect kitchen where I'd hosted countless dinner parties, family gatherings, and holiday celebrations, where I'd served Jackson's business associates and their wives, playing the gracious hostess while he networked and schmoozed, where I'd packed lunches for the twins, nursed them through childhood illnesses, and celebrated their achievements. This kitchen was the heart of a home I'd created, but apparently I was no longer welcome at celebrations that took place outside its walls. I pulled out my laptop again and opened the email from my financial advisor, Margaret Chen. We'd been working together for 10 years, and she'd helped me navigate the complexities of growing our family's wealth while maintaining Jackson's illusion that he was our primary breadwinner. "Margaret," I typed, "I may need to make some significant financial adjustments soon. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss liquidating some assets and exploring new investment strategies? I'm considering some major life changes." Her response came within minutes. "Of course, Veronica. I have an opening tomorrow at 2. Should I prepare any specific analyses?" I thought about the historic rice mill, about the $25,000 Jackson had spent celebrating his future without me, about the careful financial foundation I'd built over 2 decades of invisible labor. "Prepare a complete portfolio. Analysis," I typed. "I want to understand exactly what I'm worth independent of my husband's assets. And Margaret, this consultation is strictly confidential." "Understood completely. See you tomorrow." I closed the laptop and walked back to our wedding portrait. The young woman in the photograph looked so hopeful, so trusting. She believed in love, in partnership, in the possibility that 2 people could build something beautiful together. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was 58 years old, financially independent, and finally awake to the reality of my marriage. Jackson saw me as his past, irrelevant to his future. But he was wrong about one crucial thing. I wasn't just his past. I was also my own future, and it was time I started acting like it. The business card sat on the counter beside my coffee cup, a small piece of elegance that had revealed an enormous truth. Sometimes the catalyst for change comes in the most unexpected packages. A phone call, a conversation, a moment of clarity that shifts everything you thought you knew about your life. I picked up the card and tucked it back into my wallet. I had a feeling I might need it again soon, though not in any way Jackson could anticipate. I spent the rest of the morning in my study, a small room overlooking the garden that Jackson had always dismissed as my hobby space. The irony wasn't lost on me. This room where I'd managed our family's financial empire was considered a hobby by the man who benefited most from my expertise. The mahogany desk had belonged to my father, passed down to me after his death along with his modest stock portfolio and his belief that women needed to understand money to survive in this world. "Never depend on a man for your financial security, Veronica," he'd told me when I was 22 and fresh out of college. "Love is wonderful, but independence is essential." I'd thought I was following his advice by learning to manage our household, finances. What I hadn't realized was that I was also protecting myself from exactly this kind of betrayal. I opened the locked drawer where I kept my personal financial records, documents Jackson had never asked about, never shown interest in, seeing. The investment portfolio folder was thick with statements, prospectuses, and carefully organized spreadsheets that told the story of my financial journey over the past 2 decades. The first document was a statement from 2003, the year my father died. His modest portfolio had been worth $47,000, a high school principal's careful savings over 40 years of teaching. I'd been 29 then, pregnant with the twins, and determined to honor his memory by growing what he'd left me. What started as a small inheritance had become something extraordinary through patient research and strategic decisions. While Jackson focused on his real estate deals and assumed I was simply paying bills, I was studying market trends, researching emerging technologies, and making calculated investments that consistently outperformed the market. The numbers told a story of quiet competence that even I found impressive. By 2010, my portfolio had grown to $300,000. By 2015, it was worth over $800,000. Last year, it had crossed the $2 million mark, making me financially independent in a way Jackson couldn't imagine. But it wasn't just about the money. Each investment represented a choice, a decision made in the quiet hours while Jackson slept or traveled for business. I'd researched biotechnology companies developing cancer treatments, invested early in renewable energy, firms, and bought shares in tech companies that were revolutionizing how people lived and worked. I found my investment in Tesla from 2012, when the stock was trading at $30 a share. Jackson had laughed when I mentioned electric cars at a dinner party, calling them a fad for California liberals. That investment alone was now worth more than $400,000. There was Apple stock purchased in 2009, Amazon shares from 2011, and a diversified portfolio of healthcare and technology companies that had grown consistently over the years. While Jackson was focused on Charleston real estate and local business connections, I was building wealth through global markets and emerging industries. The historical rice mill property records were in a separate folder. My great-uncle Samuel's will had transferred ownership to me in 2010, along with a restoration fund of $200,000. The building had been in terrible condition. Broken windows, damaged floors, structural issues that would have deterred most buyers. But I'd seen its potential. I'd hired the best restoration architects in Charleston, worked with historical preservation societies, and supervised every detail of the renovation. The project took 3 years and cost nearly $800,000, all funded through my investments and the Restoration Trust. When it reopened in 2013 as Charleston's premier event venue, it was immediately booked solid. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The financial records showed the venue's profitability clearly. Average rental fee, $15,000 per event. Bookings per month, 8 to 12. Annual revenue, approximately $1.4 million. After operating expenses, insurance, and maintenance, the venue generated nearly $600,000 in annual profit, money that went directly into my investment accounts. Jackson was celebrating his 60th birthday in a venue I owned, with money I'd managed, surrounded by people who had no idea that the woman they were excluding was the financial foundation of everything they were enjoying. My phone rang, interrupting my calculations. Clara's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about Dad's party. Miles and I were thinking we should coordinate our gifts, and we wanted to make sure we're not duplicating anything you've planned." I closed my eyes, another wave of the betrayal washing over me. My own children assumed I was central to their father's celebration, just as I had been central to every other family milestone for 32 years. Actually, Clara, your father and I haven't discussed gifts. This party seems to be more focused on his business associates. Really? That's weird. Dad's always been big on family celebrations. There was a pause, and when Clara spoke again, her voice was more careful. Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad? You sound different. Clara had always been perceptive, even as a child. She'd inherited my analytical mind and my ability to read between the lines. I couldn't hide my distress from her much longer. We're going through some challenges, I admitted. Nothing for you to worry about, but things are complicated right now. Challenges? Mom, you guys have been married forever. What kind of challenges? I looked at the financial record spread across my desk. Evidence of my hidden strength and Jackson's oblivious dependence on my invisible labor. How could I explain to my daughter that her father saw me as irrelevant to his future? How could I tell her that the man she admired had excluded me from his celebration with the casual cruelty of someone discarding an unwanted possession? Your father and I have different ideas about what's important, I said finally. I'm still figuring out how to handle that. Mom, you're scaring me. Are you talking about divorce? The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Divorce. I hadn't even allowed myself to think the word until Clara said it, but now it seemed to echo in my study, bouncing off the financial records that proved I could survive it. I don't. No, sweetheart. I really don't know. Mom, whatever's going on, Miles and I are on your side. You know that, right? We've always known you're the one who holds this family together. Her words were a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. My children saw my value even if their father didn't. They recognized my contributions even if Jackson had forgotten them. Thank you, Clara. That means everything to me. Do you want to talk about it? I can drive down this weekend if you need me. Let me think about it. I need to figure some things out first. After I hung up, I sat staring at the investment portfolio. $2 million. The historic rice mill. A diversified set of assets that could support me comfortably for the rest of my life. I wasn't trapped in this marriage by financial dependence. I was trapped by my own illusions about what marriage meant. I pulled out my phone and called my financial advisor, Margaret Chen. Veronica, she answered on the second ring. I was just reviewing your portfolio for our meeting tomorrow. The numbers look excellent. Margaret, I need you to do something for me. I want a complete analysis of what my net worth would be if I divorced my husband tomorrow. There was a brief silence. Margaret had been managing my investments for 10 years, but we'd never discussed my marriage or my personal life in detail. Of course. I can have that ready for our meeting. Should I assume you want to maintain your current lifestyle? I want to understand all my options. Conservative lifestyle. Moderate. And if I chose to be extravagant. I also want to know about the tax implications of liquidating various assets. I'll have comprehensive scenarios ready. Veronica, if you don't mind my asking, is this a precautionary measure, or are you seriously considering divorce? I looked at the wedding portrait on my desk, a smaller version of the one in our living room. Jackson and I looked so young, so hopeful. But hope wasn't enough anymore. I'm considering all possibilities, I said. That afternoon, I drove to Aunt Odessa's house in the East Side, a neighborhood that had been home to Charleston's African-American community for generations. Odessa had grown up here, survived segregation, and watched the city change around her while maintaining her dignity and her sense of self. Her house was a modest Charleston single house, painted butter yellow with white trim, and a front porch that had seen decades of conversations. She was waiting for me in her rocking chair, a pitcher of sweet tea on the table beside her. "Sugar," she said as I climbed the porch steps. You look like you've been wrestling with the devil himself." I sat in the rocker beside her, accepting the glass of tea she offered. Aunt Odessa had a way of cutting through pretense that was both comforting and terrifying. "I think I might be getting divorced," I said without preamble. She nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting this conversation. "For years. What did Jackson do now?" "How did you know it was Jackson?" "Baby girl, I've been watching that man for 32 years. He's been taking you for granted since before you figured out you were being taken. I've just been waiting for you to get tired of it." I told her about the party, about the phone call with Delilah, about Jackson's casual dismissal of my presence in his life. Odessa listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. "So he's celebrating his future, without you," she said when I finished. "In a building you own, with money you managed, while telling people you're out of town on purpose. That's about the size of it. And you're wondering if you should leave him. I'm wondering if I even know who I am anymore. I've spent 32 years being Jackson's wife, Miles and Clara's mother, the woman who manages everything behind the scenes. If I'm not those things, who am I?" Aunt Odessa reached over and took my hand. Her skin was soft and weathered, marked by decades of hard work and harder choices. "You're Veronica Sinclair," she said, firmly. "You were somebody before you met Jackson, and you'll be somebody after him. You're the woman who turned $47,000 into $2 million. You're the woman who raised 2 good children and restored a historic building. You're the woman who's been holding up a marriage that should have collapsed years ago. But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm overreacting to one party?" "Sugar, this isn't about one party. This is about 32 years of a man who forgot he married a partner, not a servant. This is about you finally seeing yourself clearly instead of through his eyes." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light filter through the oak trees. Aunt Odessa had never married, though she'd had plenty of opportunities. She'd chosen independence over compromise, and at 83 she was one of the most content people I knew. "What would you do?" I asked finally. "I'd show that man exactly what he's been taking for granted. But I'd do it with style, with grace, and with enough class that he'd spend the rest of his life knowing he lost the best thing that ever happened to him." "How?" she smiled, the kind of smile that had intimidated Charleston society matrons for decades. "If they won't give you a seat. At the table, baby. Buy the whole damn table. And you already did that, didn't you?" I thought about the historic rice mill, about the party Jackson was planning, about the financial independence I'd built while he wasn't paying attention. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I guess I did." "Then it's time to let him know who's really been running the show." I drove home as the sun was setting, the golden light reflecting off Charleston Harbor. The city looked beautiful in the evening light, historic and elegant and full of possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing it clearly. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, recognizing it for what it was. Another dismissal. Another assumption that my time and attention were infinitely flexible and unimportant. But instead of the familiar pang of disappointment, I felt something else entirely. I felt free. I had spent 32 years building a life that Jackson took for granted. I had created wealth he didn't know existed, owned property he didn't know. I controlled and maintained relationships he didn't bother to nurture. I had been invisible to him for so long that he'd forgotten I was there at all. But invisibility, I was beginning to understand, could be a powerful position. When someone doesn't see you, They don't protect themselves from you. They don't guard their secrets or cover their tracks. They leave themselves vulnerable in ways they never intended. I walked into my study and opened the investment portfolio again. $2 million. The historic rice mill. A lifetime of careful decisions and strategic thinking that had prepared me for exactly this moment. Jackson thought he was celebrating his future without me. But he was wrong about one crucial thing. I wasn't just his past. I was his present, his foundation, his financial security. And I was about to become his reckoning. The next morning brought a text from Jackson at 6:30. Emergency meeting in Atlanta. Won't be back until Friday. Handle anything that comes up for the party. Handle anything that comes up for the party. The casual assumption that I would manage details for an event I wasn't invited to attend struck me as both laughable and infuriating, but it also presented an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. I made coffee and sat in my kitchen, watching the early morning light illuminate the garden Jackson and I had planned together 15 years ago. The camellia bushes were beginning to bloom, their waxy petals catching the dew. Once this view had filled me with contentment. Now it felt like a beautiful prison I'd been too comfortable to escape. My phone rang. Delilah Tran's number. Mrs. Harrington, I hope I'm not calling too early. I have a few questions about Saturday's arrangements. Of course, Delilah. What can I help you with? Well, Mr. Harrington mentioned you'd be handling some final details while he's out of town. The florist needs to confirm the centerpiece arrangements, and the jazz quartet wants to review the song list. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Jackson had left town, delegating party planning to the wife he'd excluded from the guest list. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. I'd be happy to handle those details, I said. Could you send me the vendor contact information? Absolutely. And Mrs. Harrington, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the guest list. There's no misunderstanding, Delilah, but I appreciate your concern. It's just that I've been planning events for years, and this situation feels unusual. Most wives would be central to their husband's milestone celebrations. I set down my coffee cup, suddenly seeing Delilah as more than just a vendor caught in an awkward situation. She was a successful businesswoman who understood social dynamics, and she clearly recognized that something was deeply wrong with this picture. Can I ask you something, Delilah? In your professional opinion, how would it look if the person who owns the venue showed up unexpectedly at an event? There was a long pause. You own the historic rice mill? I do. My great-uncle left it to me, and I supervised the entire restoration. It's been one of my proudest achievements. Mrs. Harrington, I had no idea. Mr. Harrington presented himself as someone who'd arranged the venue rental through business connections. Jackson doesn't know I own it. He's never taken much interest in my inheritance or my investments. Another pause, and when Delilah spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. As a professional event planner, I can tell you that the venue owner absolutely has the right to attend any event held on their property. It's actually standard to invite the owner as a courtesy, even for private celebrations. I see. And what would happen if the owner decided to make an appearance? Well, it would be perfectly appropriate. In fact, it would be expected. Most venue owners like to ensure their property is being treated with respect. I felt a slow smile spreading across my face. Thank you, Delilah. That's very helpful information. Mrs. Harrington, whatever you decide to do, I want you to know that I think you're handling this situation with remarkable grace. After we hung up, I drove back to Aunt Odessa's house. I found her in her living room, dusting a collection of vinyl records that filled an entire wall. The albums represented 60 years of jazz history, from Duke Ellington to John Coltrane, from Ella Fitzgerald to Nina Simone. "Back so soon, sugar?" she asked, not looking up from her cleaning. "I need more advice, and maybe some of your courage." She set down her dusting cloth and gestured to the couch. "Sit down and tell me what's got you stirred up now." I explained Jackson's text, Delilah's call, and the growing realization that I held more power in this situation than I'd initially understood. "So you own the building where he's throwing his party," Odessa said thoughtfully. "That man's been playing chess while sitting on your board, and he doesn't even know it. But what should I do with that knowledge? Part of me wants to show up and embarrass him in front of everyone, but another part thinks I should take the high road and handle this privately." Odessa walked to her record collection and pulled out a worn album, Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. She held it carefully, as if it contained something precious. "This record belonged to my mama," she said. "She bought it in 1939, when most folks were too scared to play it. You know why she bought it?" I shook my head. "Because sometimes the truth needs to be heard, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Especially when it makes people uncomfortable." She, handed me the album, and I felt the weight of it, the history it represented. My mama worked as a seamstress for white families who treated her like she was invisible. They'd talk about their private business right in front of her, like she wasn't even there. But she was listening, learning, understanding exactly who these people really were beneath their polite exteriors. What did she do with that knowledge? She used it wisely, not to hurt people, but to protect herself and make better choices. Knowledge is power, sugar, but wisdom is knowing how to use that power. I turned the album over in my hands, studying the track listing. So what would wisdom look like in my situation? That depends. Do you want to hurt Jackson? Or do you want to be free of him? The question hit me like a physical blow. In all my anger and planning, I hadn't clearly separated those two goals. Did I want revenge? Or did I want liberation? "I want my dignity back," I said finally. "I want him to understand what he's thrown away. But I don't want to become someone I can't respect." Odessa nodded approvingly. "Now you're thinking clearly. The question isn't whether you should show up to that party. It's how you should show up." "What do you mean?" "You could storm in there angry and hurt, making a scene that everyone will gossip about for years. Or you could walk in there like the successful, independent woman you are, owning your space and your worth. One makes you look desperate. The other makes you look powerful." I thought about this distinction as I drove home. The difference between reacting from hurt and responding from strength. The difference between making a scene and making a statement. My phone was buzzing with messages when I got home. Miles had texted. "Mom, Clara told me you and Dad are having problems. Do you want to talk?" I called him back and he answered on the first ring. "Mom, what's going on?" Clara's worried, and honestly, so am I. Miles had always been my emotional child, sensitive to undercurrents that others missed. He'd inherited my empathy, along with Jackson's determination, making him an excellent teacher and a perceptive son. "Your father and I are going through some challenges," I said, using the same careful language I'd used with Clara. "Is this about Dad's party? Because I have to tell you, the whole thing seems weird to me. Since when does Dad plan major celebrations without you?" Since when, indeed? I sat down in my study, surrounded by the financial records that told the story of my invisible contributions. "Miles, can I ask you something? Growing up, what did you think about the dynamics between your father and me. There was a long pause, and when Miles spoke, his voice was careful. Honestly, I always thought Dad took you for granted. You managed everything. The house, the money, our schedules, family events. But he got all the credit for being successful while you did the actual work. His words validated feelings I'd been suppressing for years. My own son had seen what I'd been too loyal or too scared to acknowledge. I never wanted to say anything because you seemed happy, he continued. But Clara and I used to talk about how Dad would be lost without you, and how he never seemed to appreciate everything you did. You and Clara discussed this? We're not blind, Mom. We see how hard you work to make everyone else's life easier. And we see how Dad just expects it, like it's your job to be invisible. Invisible. There was that word again, the word that had been haunting me since Delilah's phone call. Miles, what would you think if I told you I was considering divorce? Another pause, but this one felt different, thoughtful, rather than shocked. I'd think it was about time, he said quietly, and I'd want to make sure you knew that Clara and I would support whatever decision you made. After we hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, processing what my children had told me. They'd seen the imbalance in my marriage, recognized my contributions, and were prepared to support me in changing my situation. The people who mattered most in my life already understood my worth, even if their father had forgotten it. That evening, I had dinner with my neighbor, Sarah Chen, an immigration attorney who'd moved next door 5 years ago. We'd developed a friendship based on our shared appreciation for good wine and honest conversation. You look different, Sarah said as we shared a bottle of Pinot Noir on her back porch. More awake somehow. I told her about Jackson's party, about my discovery of his deliberate exclusion, about the financial independence he didn't know I possessed. Ronnie, she said when I finished, I have to ask, do you think Jackson is having an affair? The question hung in the air between us. I'd been so focused on my exclusion from the party that I hadn't fully considered why he might want me absent. I don't know, I admitted. There's his assistant, Camila. She's young, ambitious, always traveling with him to meetings. But I've never had concrete evidence. The thing about affairs, Sarah said gently, is that they're often about more than sex. They're about feeling important, appreciated, seen. If Jackson's been taking you for granted for years, another woman's attention might be intoxicating. Does it matter if he is having an affair? My marriage has been empty for years, whether there's another woman or not. It matters for the divorce. Proceedings, Sarah said practically. South Carolina still considers adultery in divorce settlements. If Jackson is cheating, it could affect property division and alimony. I don't need alimony. I have my own money. Sarah raised an eyebrow. How much money are we talking about? About $2 million, plus the venue property. She nearly choked on her wine. Ronnie, you're not just financially independent. You're wealthy. Does Jackson know? He's never asked. He assumes I'm managing household accounts with modest savings. So, he's planning to exclude you from his celebration, while unknowingly depending on your financial support. That's about the size of it. Sarah leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. This is like something out of a novel. The overlooked wife, who's actually the power behind the throne. As I walked home that night, I thought about power. How it could be invisible. How it could accumulate quietly. How it could shift without anyone noticing until the moment of revelation. I had spent 32 years building power I didn't fully recognize. Financial independence. Property ownership. the respect of my children, the support of friends who saw my worth clearly. Jackson's dismissal of me wasn't just cruel. It was strategically stupid. Back in my study, I opened Aunt Odessa's jazz album and placed it on my old turntable. Billie Holiday's voice filled the room, haunting and powerful, singing about difficult truths that needed to be heard. I looked at my investment records again, but this time I saw them differently, not as evidence of Jackson's ignorance, but as proof of my own competence, not as a secret to be hidden, but as a foundation to build upon. Tomorrow I would meet with Margaret Chen and understand exactly what my options were. I would plan not just my response to Jackson's betrayal, but my strategy for the life I wanted to build beyond this marriage. The jazz record played on, filling my study with the sound of a woman who had faced difficult truths and found the strength to sing them, like Billie Holiday, like Aunt Odessa, like my mother and grandmother before me. I was discovering that power wasn't always about being seen. Sometimes the most powerful position was the one nobody expected you to occupy. Margaret Chen's office was located in a sleek building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. I'd been working with her for 10 years, but this was the first time I'd requested a meeting to discuss my personal, financial independence, rather than our family's joint investments. "Veronica," she said as I settled into the leather chair across from her desk, "I've prepared the analysis you requested. The numbers are quite impressive." She spread several documents across her desk, charts, graphs, and projections that told the story of my financial life in stark numerical terms. "Your net worth, independent of your husband's assets, is approximately $2.3 million, she began. "This includes your investment portfolio, the historic rice mill property, and several other assets I wasn't aware you held separately." "Other assets?" Margaret pulled out a thick folder I didn't recognize. "When I did the comprehensive review you requested, I discovered some interesting property holdings that are in your name only. Did you know you hold the mortgage on your husband's office building?" I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean?" "The Harrington Group's headquarters on Broad Street. According to these records, you've been the mortgage holder since 2018. The payments come directly from Jackson's business account to your investment portfolio." The room seemed to tilt around me. Jackson's office building. The prestigious address he was so proud of, the location where he hosted important clients and conducted million-dollar deals, was financed through my money. "Margaret, I need you to explain this slowly. How is that possible?" She opened a file that contained documents I'd apparently signed but forgotten. "In 2018, Jackson's business needed significant capital for expansion. Traditional commercial. Loans were expensive, and he was overextended on other properties. You provided a private mortgage of $1.2 million at below-market rates." The memory came flooding back. Jackson had been stressed about financing, worried about interest rates and bank approval processes. I'd suggested using some of my investment funds to help him, structuring it as a private mortgage that would give us better returns than my bonds while saving him money on interest. "I remember now," I said slowly. "But I thought it was just a temporary arrangement. It became permanent. He's been making payments to you for 5 years, $8,400 per month. That's been one of your most reliable income streams." I sat back in my chair, the full implications washing over me. Jackson's business success, his prestigious office location, his ability to impress clients and secure deals. All of it was built on a foundation I'd provided and he'd apparently forgotten about. "Margaret, what would happen if I called in that mortgage?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. You'd be within your legal rights to demand full payment. The terms specify that you can require immediate repayment with 90 days' notice. And if he couldn't pay? You'd own the building. Given Charleston's commercial real estate market, it's probably worth $2.8 million now. You'd make a substantial profit. I looked out the window at Charleston Harbor, watching boats navigate the choppy water. Jackson was celebrating his future, without me, planning his exclusive party for people who mattered to his future, while building his empire on financial support I'd provided, and he'd conveniently forgotten. "There's more," Margaret continued. "I found records of several other loans you've made to Jackson's business over the years. Smaller amounts, but they add up. In total, you've provided nearly $2 million in private financing to Harrington Group." $2 million. My voice came out as a whisper. "Your husband's business success has been substantially underwritten by your personal wealth. Without your financial support, Harrington Group would likely have failed during the 2008 recession. The 2008 recession, I remembered that period clearly. Jackson's stress, his late nights, his constant worry about cash flow and loan payments. I'd quietly transferred money from my accounts to help with payroll and operating expenses, telling myself it was protecting our family's security. Margaret, I need you to prepare something for me. I want a complete accounting of every dollar I've invested in Jackson's business, every loan I've made, every payment I've covered. I want dates, amounts, and current valuations. Are you considering calling in these loans?" I thought about Jackson's text that morning, his casual assumption that I would handle party details for an event I wasn't invited to attend. I thought about 32 years of invisible contributions and unacknowledged support. "I'm considering all my options," Margaret handed me a business card. "If you're thinking about divorce, you'll need an excellent attorney. Patricia Willingham is the best in Charleston for complex financial cases." I took the card, noting the elegant script and prestigious law firm address. Patricia Willingham. I'd heard the name at charity events and social gatherings. She represented Charleston's wealthiest women in their most difficult moments. "One more thing, Veronica. If you do decide to pursue divorce, you should document everything before Jackson becomes aware of your intentions. Men like your husband often try to hide assets once they know a divorce is coming." I left Margaret's office with a folder full of documents that reframed my entire marriage. I wasn't just Jackson's overlooked wife. I was his primary creditor, his secret financial backer, the invisible foundation of his professional success. I drove to the historic rice mill, using my owner's key to let myself into the restored building. The space was beautiful in the afternoon light, with original brick walls and industrial windows that overlooked the harbor. I'd supervised every detail of this restoration, from the custom lighting to the restored hardwood floors. This building represented my vision, my aesthetic judgment, my financial investment. And Saturday night, Jackson would celebrate his 60th birthday here, surrounded by people who believed he was a self-made success. My phone rang. Delilah's number again. "Mrs. Harrington, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to update you on the party preparations. Everything is coming together beautifully." "I'm actually at the venue now," I said, looking around the space I'd created. "Oh, wonderful. How does everything look?" "Perfect, as always." "Delilah, can I ask you something? When Jackson booked this venue, what did he tell you about his connection to the building?" There was a pause. "He said he had special access through business relationships. He was quite proud of securing such an exclusive location. Special access through business relationships. Jackson had presented my property, as his achievement, my restoration work as his networking success. I see. And the catering arrangements. Confirmed for 65 guests. The menu is exquisite. She crab soup, shrimp and grits, bourbon pecan tart. Very Charleston, very sophisticated. What about the jazz quartet? They're excited to perform. Mr. Harrington requested classic standards. The Way You Look Tonight, Fly Me to the Moon. Songs from his generation. His generation. Jackson was celebrating his 60th birthday with music from our generation. Food from our shared culinary heritage in a building I'd restored to honor our city's history. But he deliberately excluded me from the celebration. Delilah, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. About venue owners typically being invited to events. Yes, it's standard courtesy. In fact, many venue owners insist on making an appearance to ensure everything meets their standards. What time does the party begin? Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8:30. The peak of the evening should be around 9:30, when Mr. Harrington gives his toast. His toast. Jackson would stand in my building, surrounded by success built on my financial support, and toast his future without acknowledging the woman who'd made it all possible. Thank you, Delilah. You've been very helpful. That evening, I called Patricia Willingham's office and scheduled a consultation for the following morning. Then I sat in my study, surrounded by financial documents that told a story Jackson had never bothered to read. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson in Atlanta. Meeting's going well. Might have the waterfront financing secured. We'll call tonight. The waterfront project, his latest development venture, the one he'd been pursuing so aggressively. I opened my laptop and researched the project details, finding articles about the luxury condominiums he planned to build overlooking Charleston Harbor. The more I read, the more familiar the project seemed. The architect was someone I'd recommended after meeting her at a gallery opening. The environmental impact studies had been conducted by a firm I'd suggested when Jackson was complaining about regulatory delays. Even the marketing firm handling the project was one I'd introduced him to through my charity work. My contributions to Jackson's success weren't just financial. They were intellectual, social, creative. I'd been his silent partner in ways I was only beginning to understand. Jackson called at 9 o'clock, his voice energetic and pleased. Ronnie, the meetings have gone even better than I hoped. The Hamilton Group is ready to commit, and I think we'll have full financing by next month. That's wonderful, I said, though my voice sounded flat even to my own ears. I know I've been distracted lately, focused on getting this deal done. But after Saturday's party, after the waterfront project is secured, we should take a trip together. Maybe Europe? It's been too long since we traveled. Europe. After his exclusive celebration, after his future was secured, then he'd have time for his wife. The casual assumption that I would be available whenever his schedule permitted made my teeth ache. Jackson, about Saturday's party. Oh, did Delilah reach you about the details? I knew I could count on you to handle anything that came up. She did call. We had an interesting conversation about venue protocols. Good, good. I want everything to be perfect. This party could secure some important relationships for the waterfront project. I'm sure it will be memorable, I said. After we hung up, I walked through our house, seeing it with new eyes. The antique furniture I'd selected and purchased. The art collection I'd curated over decades of gallery visits. The renovations I'd planned and supervised. Even this house, which Jackson considered his proudest possession, was largely my creation. I paused in front of our wedding portrait, studying the young couple who'd seemed so happy, so united in their goals and dreams. What had happened to that partnership? When had I become the invisible support system rather than the equal partner? The answer, I realized, had been gradual. Each time I'd stepped back from my career to support his ambitions, each time I'd managed a crisis without him noticing, each time I'd provided financial help that he'd accepted without acknowledging, each time I'd made his success possible while remaining in the background, I'd trained him to take me for granted by never demanding recognition for my contributions. I'd enabled his oversight by managing everything so efficiently that my efforts seemed effortless. I'd become invisible by making invisibility my default mode. But invisibility, I was learning, could be temporary. It could be a choice rather than a condition, and choices could be changed. I opened my laptop and began researching Charleston's social calendar for Saturday night. The Historic Preservation Society was hosting a lecture at 7 o'clock. The Symphony League had a small fundraiser at 8. Multiple charity events, gallery openings, and social gatherings were happening across the city. Jackson's party wasn't the only place to be seen on Saturday night, but it would be the place where Charleston's business and social elite gathered to celebrate a man whose success had been quietly underwritten by the wife he had chosen to exclude. I thought about Aunt Odessa's advice. Show up like the powerful woman you are, owning your space and your worth. I thought about Margaret's revelations, Jackson's business empire built on loans I'd provided, and apparently forgotten. I thought about the property deed in my filing cabinet, the historic rice mill, the prestigious venue where Jackson would celebrate his future, owned by the woman he considered irrelevant to that future. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. But this wasn't a script. This was my life, my marriage, my 32 years of invisible contributions finally coming into focus. I closed my laptop and walked back to my study, where Billie Holiday's album still sat on the turntable. I played Strange Fruit again, letting the haunting melody fill the room while I made my decision. Saturday night, Jackson would get the exclusive party he'd planned, and I would get something I'd been denied for too long. The recognition I deserved, delivered with the dignity I'd never lost, and the power I was finally ready to claim. The venue owner, the secret financier, the invisible partner, all of these roles were about to become very visible indeed. Friday morning arrived with the kind of perfect Charleston weather that made tourists fall in love with the city. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of golden light that made everything look like a painting. I dressed carefully for my appointment with Patricia Willingham. Navy suit, pearl earrings, the kind of understated elegance that suggested serious business. Patricia's law office was located in a restored antebellum mansion on Meeting Street, the kind of address that whispered old money and older secrets. She was waiting for me in a conference room lined with law books and family portraits, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades fighting for Charleston's wealthiest wives. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Margaret Chen spoke very highly of you. She said you have an interesting financial situation." "Interesting is one way to put it," I replied, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I spread Margaret's documents across the mahogany table. Investment portfolios, property deeds, loan agreements, and mortgage records that told the story of my invisible financial empire. Patricia studied the papers with the focused attention of a surgeon examining X-rays. After 20 minutes, she looked up with something approaching amazement. "Mrs. Harrington, in 30 years of family law practice, I've never seen a case quite like this. You're not just financially independent, you're your husband's primary creditor." That's what Margaret told me. I wanted to understand my legal position, Your legal position is extraordinary. You hold mortgages on his office building. You've provided private loans that total nearly $2 million. And you own property he's been using for business purposes. If you wanted to file for divorce tomorrow, you'd be negotiating from a position of incredible strength. She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Tell me about the personal situation. What's prompted you to consider divorce now? I told her about the birthday party, about Jackson's deliberate exclusion, about 32 years of being taken for granted culminating in this ultimate dismissal. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. Emotional abandonment, financial dependence disguised as partnership, exclusion from social and business functions, she summarized. In South Carolina, these factors could support claims for divorce based on habitual drunkenness or physical cruelty, but desertion might be more applicable here. Desertion? When one spouse withdraws from the marriage emotionally and practically while still living in the same household. Your husband's behavior suggests he's already left the marriage in everything but legal terms. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Mrs. Harrington, I need to ask, do you suspect your husband of having an affair? The question I'd been avoiding. I don't have proof, but there are signs. His assistant, Camilla Reyes. She's young, ambitious, travels with him frequently. My neighbor suggested I investigate. If there's adultery involved, it could significantly impact the settlement. South Carolina still considers marital fault in divorce proceedings. Patricia handed me a business card for a private investigator. David Morrison is discreet and thorough. If your husband is having an affair, David will find evidence. How long would that take? For someone as careless as your husband sounds? Probably not long. Men having mid-life affairs often become surprisingly sloppy about covering their tracks. I pocketed the investigator's card, though part of me wondered if I even needed proof of an affair. Jackson's emotional betrayal felt complete, regardless of whether another woman was involved. Mrs. Harrington, can I give you some advice? Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. Don't let anger drive your decisions. You're in an incredibly powerful position financially, but power requires strategy, not just emotion. What kind of strategy? Document everything. Secure your assets. And if you decide to confront your husband about this situation, do it when you're holding all the cards, not when you're reacting to the latest hurt. I left Patricia's office with a clear understanding of my legal position and a growing sense of my own power. I wasn't a victim of Jackson's neglect. I was a woman with options, resources, and the legal right to demand respect. My phone rang as I walked back to my car. Miles's number. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Clara and I want to do something for you. What do you mean? We want to take you to dinner tonight. Somewhere nice, just the three of us. We realized we don't spend enough time appreciating you. The timing felt like a gift. I'd love that, sweetheart. Good. We made reservations at Peninsula Grill for 7. Dress up. We want to celebrate you properly. Dinner with my children. People who saw my worth clearly, who appreciated my contributions, who understood that I was more than Jackson's invisible wife. The contrast with Saturday night's celebration, where I was deliberately excluded, couldn't have been more stark. I spent the afternoon handling Jackson's party details, the irony not lost on me. I confirmed the florist's arrangements, approved the jazz quartet's song list, and coordinated with the catering staff. Every vendor I spoke with assumed I would be attending the celebration, expressing excitement about seeing me at the event. Mrs. Harrington, your husband is so lucky to have you managing all these details, the florist said. The centerpieces are going to be stunning. Lucky to have me. If only Jackson shared that perspective. Around 4 o'clock, I was reviewing the final catering invoice when something caught my attention. The credit card used for several party expenses was one I managed but Jackson carried, an account I monitored for business expenses and major purchases. I logged into the account online to check the recent charges. Flowers, catering deposits, jazz quartet booking, all the party expenses I expected to see. But there was another charge that made me freeze. Saks Fifth Avenue, $3,200, dated 3 days ago. I called Saks and asked to speak with a manager about the purchase. Mrs. Harrington, yes, I remember this transaction. Your husband was shopping for a special occasion dress. He was very particular about the size and style. Can you tell me what he purchased? A Vera Wang cocktail dress in navy silk, size 6. Quite beautiful. He said it was for someone very important. Size 6, I was a size 10, had been for 15 years. Jackson knew my size perfectly well. He'd bought me clothes for birthdays and anniversaries over the years. Did he mention who the dress was for? A special business associate, he said. Someone who would be attending an important event with. Him. I thanked the manager and hung up, staring at the receipt on my computer screen. $3,200 for a dress he'd bought for another woman, using money from an account I managed, while excluding me from the event where she'd presumably wear it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Jackson wasn't just excluding me from his birthday party. He was bringing another woman as his companion, while I handled the planning details like an unpaid event coordinator. He was shopping for his replacement's outfit. I printed the receipt and added it to my growing file of evidence. The dress purchase wasn't just proof of an affair. It was proof of Jackson's complete disregard for my feelings and our marriage vows. He was flaunting his betrayal while expecting me to facilitate it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Flight delayed. Won't be home until late tonight. Thanks for handling everything with the party. Thanks for handling everything. As if I were his secretary rather than his wife. As if managing the details of my own exclusion were just another domestic task I should perform with a smile. I walked through our house, seeing it differently now that I understood the full scope of Jackson's betrayal. This wasn't just a marriage that had grown cold. This was an elaborate deception where I'd been cast as the invisible support staff for my husband's new life. But Jackson had made a crucial error in his calculations. He'd become so accustomed to my invisibility that he'd forgotten I was a person with agency, intelligence, and resources. He'd been so focused on his new future that he'd failed to secure his foundation in the present. I called David Morrison, the private investigator Patricia had recommended. Mr. Morrison, Patricia Willingham gave me your number. I need to document some information about my husband's activities. Of course. What kind of timeline are we looking at? I need evidence immediately. There's an event tomorrow night where I believe my husband will be publicly involved with another woman. I can have a team in place by tomorrow evening. What's the location? The historic rice mill. A private party from 7 until midnight. We'll be discreet. Most of our documentation will be photographic, establishing presence, behavior, interactions. Perfect. Send me the bill directly. That evening, I dressed carefully for dinner with Miles and Clara. Black silk dress, the pearl necklace Jackson had given me for our 20th anniversary. Diamond earrings I'd bought myself but let him take credit for. I looked successful, elegant, confident. Nothing like the dismissed wife Jackson apparently saw when he looked at me. Peninsula Grill was one of Charleston's most romantic restaurants, all candlelight and antique charm. Miles and Clara were waiting at a corner table, both dressed up and looking nervous. "Mom," Clara said as I approached, "you look beautiful." "Thank you, sweetheart. You both look wonderful, too." Miles stood to pull out my chair, a gesture Jackson had stopped making years ago. "Mom, we need to tell you something. Clara and I have been talking, and we want you to know that whatever happens with Dad, we're on your side." "Completely," Clara added. "We've seen how he treats you, and it's not okay. You deserve better." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Thank you both. That means everything to me." Over dinner, my children shared memories I'd forgotten. Times I'd supported their dreams, solved their problems, celebrated their achievements while Jackson was distracted by business. They painted a picture of a mother who'd been fully present for them while being completely taken for granted by their father. "Remember when I was applying to law school?" Clara said. "Dad kept saying I should consider staying in Charleston, going to South Carolina, staying close to home. But you told me to apply to Emory, said I should go wherever would challenge me most. And when I wanted to teach instead of going into business," Miles added, "Dad was disappointed, but you said following my passion was more important than following his expectations." They saw me as the parent who'd encouraged their independence, while Jackson had tried to keep them small and manageable. They saw me as the foundation of our family, while he'd been the decoration. "We know about the party tomorrow night," Clara said quietly. "Dad told us you didn't want to attend, that you preferred to have a quiet evening at home." "That's not exactly what happened," I said carefully. "We figured," Miles replied. "Dad's been telling a lot of stories lately that don't quite add up." We talked until the restaurant began to close, and when they walked me to my car, both children hugged me tightly. "Mom," Clara whispered, "whatever you decide to do, we support you completely. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't matter, because you matter to us more than anything." I drove home with their words echoing in my mind. I mattered to my children. I mattered to Aunt Odessa. I mattered to friends like Sarah Chen, who saw my worth clearly. The only person who'd forgotten my value was the man who'd benefited most from it. Jackson's car was in the driveway when I arrived. He'd made it home from Atlanta earlier than expected. I found him in his study, reviewing documents that looked like contracts or agreements. "How was dinner?" he asked without looking up. "Lovely. Miles and Clara send their love." "Good, good. The party planning is all set for tomorrow?" "Everything's confirmed. It should be exactly what you wanted." He finally looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, or recognition that his wife was more essential than he'd been admitting. "Ronnie, I know I've been distracted lately. After tomorrow night, after this deal closes, we should plan some time together." Time together! After his exclusive celebration with another woman, after his business success was secured on my financial foundation, then he'd make time for his wife. "That sounds nice," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. I went upstairs and prepared for bed, but sleep seemed impossible. Tomorrow night, Jackson would celebrate his 60th birthday in my building, surrounded by success I'd financed, wearing confidence I'd helped build, while the woman he was replacing me with wore a dress he'd bought with my money. But Jackson had miscalculated. He'd planned his exclusive celebration without realizing that exclusion was a game two people could play. He'd forgotten that invisibility could be a choice rather than a condition. Tomorrow night, he would get the party he'd planned And I would get something I'd been denied for 32 years. The recognition I deserved, delivered with the dignity I'd never lost, and the power I was finally ready to claim. The venue owner was about to make an appearance at her own property, and Charleston society was about to learn exactly who had been the real power behind Jackson Harrington's success all along. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect Charleston weather that made every social event feel destined for success. I spent the day in careful preparation, not for attending Jackson's party, but for making the kind of entrance that would redefine everything Charleston society thought they knew about the Harrington marriage. I had my hair styled at the salon, where I'd been a client for 15 years, choosing an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings I'd bought myself for my 50th birthday. My dress was a midnight blue Valentino I'd purchased in New York last spring. Sophisticated, expensive, and utterly appropriate for a woman who owned one of Charleston's most prestigious event venues. At 5 o'clock, I received a text from David Morrison. Team in position. Documentation beginning at 6:30. We'll have preliminary photos by 8 to a hour. At 5:30, Jackson called from his office. Everything looks perfect for tonight, Ronnie. Thank you for handling all the details. It was my pleasure, I said and meant it. Handling the details had given me complete knowledge of his plans, his guests, and his timeline. I'll be home around 6 to get ready. Don't wait up tonight. The party might run late. I won't wait up, I assured him. I have plans of my own. At 6 o'clock, I was putting the finishing touches on my makeup when Jackson arrived home. I heard him in the shower singing off-key, as he had for 32 years, completely unaware that his wife was preparing for the most significant evening of their marriage. He appeared in our bedroom doorway at 6:45, resplendent in his custom tuxedo, for a moment looking at him. I remembered the man I'd fallen in love with, handsome, confident, full of dreams we'd once shared. You look beautiful, he said, and I almost believed he meant it. Thank you. You look handsome yourself, he kissed. My cheek, the same perfunctory gesture he'd been making for years. I'll see you tomorrow. Don't wait up. Have a wonderful time, I said. After he left, I sat in our bedroom for several minutes, processing the moment. For 32 years, I'd been the woman who stayed home while Jackson attended important events. Tonight, that woman was gone forever. At 7:15, I received my first text from David Morrison. Subject arrived with female companion. Navy dress, as you described. Photographing now. Camilla. Jackson had brought his assistant to his birthday party dressed in the $3,000 gown he'd bought with my money. The brazenness of it was almost impressive. At 7:30, I put on my jewelry. The pearl necklace from our anniversary, the diamond bracelet I'd inherited from my grandmother, the wedding ring that still caught the light after 32 years. I looked like exactly what I was, a successful woman of substance, elegantly dressed for an important evening. I drove to the historic rice mill, using the back entrance and my private key. The venue was transformed for Jackson's celebration. White roses and candles everywhere. The jazz quartet playing in the corner. Charleston's elite mingling with champagne and conversation. Through the windows, I could see Jackson holding court. Near the bar, Camilla at his side in her navy Verawang dress. I made my way to the venue manager's office, a small space on the second floor that overlooked the main event space. From here, I could observe everything while remaining unseen. The perfect position for a woman who'd been invisible for so long. My phone buzzed with more photos from David. Jackson and Camilla standing close together, her hand on his arm. Jackson introducing her to his business associates. The two of them looking like a couple in every way that mattered. At 8 o'clock, I received a text from Delilah. "Mrs. Harrington, everything is going beautifully. Your husband seems very pleased with the arrangements." I texted back, "Thank you. I'll be making an appearance soon." "Oh, wonderful. I'll watch for you." At 8:15, I heard Jackson's voice rise above the conversation as he began his birthday toast. I moved to the window overlooking the main floor, watching as Charleston's business and social elite gathered around him. "Friends," Jackson said, raising his champagne glass, "thank you for being here tonight to celebrate not just my 60th birthday, but the future we're building together. The future." There was that word again. The future that apparently didn't include his wife. "This venue," he continued, gesturing around the restored brick walls, "represents everything I love about Charleston. History, elegance, the kind of timeless beauty that never goes out of style." He was talking about my building, my restoration project, my vision, as if he'd discovered it independently. "I want to thank my beautiful companion this evening," he said, turning to Camilla, "for reminding me that life is about more than just business success. Sometimes it's about finding someone who sees your potential and believes in your dreams," the crowd murmured approvingly. Charleston society watching, Jackson Harrington publicly acknowledged his mistress while his wife was allegedly out of town. "And finally," Jackson said, his voice growing more confident, "I want to announce that the waterfront project is moving forward. We've secured the financing, and construction will begin this fall." Applause filled the room. Jackson's business. Associates raised their glasses to toast his success. Success built on loans I'd provided, in a venue I owned, financed with money I'd managed. It was time. I walked downstairs to the main floor, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd personally selected during the restoration. Conversations quieted as people noticed me, confusion spreading across faces that had expected me to be elsewhere. "Veronica!" Delilah appeared at my side, looking genuinely pleased. "You look absolutely stunning. I'm so glad you decided to join us." "Thank you, Delilah. This is my venue, after all. I like to ensure everything meets my standards." My voice carried across the room, reaching Jackson mid-conversation. I watched his face change as he saw me. Confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room, "I hope you're all enjoying this beautiful evening." The room fell silent except for the jazz quartet, who continued playing softly in the corner. For those who don't know me, I'm Veronica Harrington, Jackson's wife of 32 years, and the owner of this venue. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Several people looked between Jackson and me, clearly confused about why his wife was introducing herself at his birthday party. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate my husband's 60th birthday. It's been fascinating to watch this celebration unfold, especially since I arranged most of the details myself." Jackson started moving toward me, his face pale. Camilla remained frozen by the bar, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "You see?" I continued, my voice calm and clear. "I've been thinking about birthdays lately, about marking significant moments in our lives. 60 is quite a milestone, isn't it? A time to reflect on what we've built, what we've accomplished, who we've become." I reached into my evening bag and pulled out an envelope containing the handwritten note I'd prepared that afternoon. The stationery was elegant, my handwriting clear and measured. "Jackson, darling," I said, holding the envelope, "I wanted to give you a birthday gift, but I realized you already have everything you need. You have this beautiful venue, which I own and restored. You have your successful business, which I financed with nearly $2 million in private loans. You have your prestigious office building, which I hold the mortgage on. The silence in the room was complete now. Even the jazz quartet had stopped playing. And you have your lovely companion for the evening, I said, looking directly at Camilla, wearing the beautiful dress you purchased with our joint credit card 3 days ago. Vera Wang, if I'm not mistaken. $3,200. Quite expensive for a business associate. Camilla's face went white. Several people in the crowd turned to stare at her, recognition dawning in their eyes. Jackson finally reached me, his voice low and urgent. "Ronnie, what are you doing? This isn't the place, isn't it?" I interrupted, my voice still perfectly controlled. "This is exactly the place, Jackson. This is my place. This building, this venue, this business. It's all mine. And this celebration of your future, it's been funded entirely by the woman you decided wasn't important enough to invite." I opened the envelope and unfolded the note I'd written, my handwriting, clear and elegant on the cream-colored paper. "I prepared some remarks for this evening," I said, reading from my note. "My dear friends and colleagues, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate Jackson's 60th birthday. As his wife of 32 years, I want to share some thoughts about partnership, about recognition, and about the importance of acknowledging the people who make our success possible." I looked up from the note, making eye contact with faces I'd known for decades. Business partners, social acquaintances, people who'd been guests in my home. Over the past 3 decades, I've had the privilege of supporting my husband's career in ways both visible and invisible. I've managed our family's finances, invested our assets, and provided the foundation that allowed Jackson to pursue his dreams. The Harrington Group's success has been built on private loans I provided, in an office building I own, with investment capital I managed. Jackson's face was now completely white. "Ronnie, please." "I'm not finished," I said firmly. "Tonight, Jackson announced that the waterfront project is moving forward. What he didn't mention is that this project, like all his others, has been made possible by the financial support of his wife, the woman he chose not to invite to this celebration." I folded the note and returned it to the envelope, then handed it to Jackson. "This contains a complete accounting of every loan I've made to your business, every mortgage I hold, every investment I've managed on your behalf. Consider it my birthday gift to you. Transparency about who has really been funding your success." The room was so quiet, I could hear the harbor outside, the gentle lapping of water against the docks. "As for the future you've been toasting," I continued, "I think it's time we discussed what that future actually looks like. Because the woman who's been supporting your dreams for 32 years has some dreams of her own." I turned to address the room again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for witnessing this moment. For too long, I've been invisible in my own life, working behind the scenes while others took credit for my contributions. Tonight, that changes." I looked directly at Camilla, who was still frozen by the bar. "Ms. Reyes, I believe you're wearing a dress my husband purchased for you with our joint credit card. It's lovely, though I'm sure you understand this creates some awkward questions about business expenses and personal relationships." Camilla finally found her voice. "Mrs. Harrington, I can explain." "No explanation necessary," I said smoothly. "Your presence here tonight, wearing that dress, standing at my husband's side, explains everything perfectly clearly." I turned back to Jackson, who looked like he was about to be sick. "Jackson, Want you to know that I'm filing for divorce on Monday morning. Patricia Willingham will be handling my case. I'm sure you'll be hearing from her soon." The crowd was beginning to murmur now, the shock giving way to fascination. This was the kind of social drama Charleston society would be discussing for years. "As for this venue," I said, looking around the room, "I'll be making some changes to the booking policies. The historic rice mill will continue to host Charleston's most important events, but future bookings will require full disclosure of all parties involved." I picked up a champagne glass from a nearby table, raising it in a toast. "To honesty," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "To recognizing the people who make our success possible, and to the future, which belongs to those brave enough to claim it." I took a sip of champagne, set down the glass, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted before me, their faces a mixture of shock, admiration, and fascination. At the doorway, I turned back one final time. "Jackson, enjoy the rest of your party. The venue is paid for through midnight, so please, celebrate your future, to your heart's content. But remember, the woman who made all this possible won't be here to clean up afterward." I walked out of the historic rice mill, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd chosen, through the doors I'd designed, leaving behind the life I'd outgrown. Outside, Charleston's evening air was sweet with jasmine and possibility. I could hear the muted sounds of the party continuing behind me, but they seemed distant now, like echoes from someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text from David Morrison. "Documented everything. Have complete photo evidence of the evening's events. We'll have full report ready Monday morning." Another text from Aunt Odessa. "How did it go, sugar?" I typed back. "It went perfectly. I'll tell you everything tomorrow." One more text from Clara. "Mom, Miles and I are so proud of you. Whatever happened tonight, we know you handled it with grace." I sat in my car for a moment, looking back at the building I'd restored, the venue where I'd just reclaimed my dignity and my future. Through the windows, I could see the party continuing, but the celebration felt hollow now, like a performance without its leading lady. For 32 years, I'd been the invisible woman behind Jackson's success. Tonight, I'd stepped into the light and claimed my place in the story. Not as his wife, not as his support system, but as Veronica Harrington, the woman who'd built the foundation for everything he'd achieved. I started my car and drove home through Charleston's quiet streets, past the houses where I'd hosted dinner, parties, the gardens where I'd walked with friends, the life I'd built and was now ready to leave behind. The woman who'd entered the historic rice mill tonight was different from the one who'd discovered that invoice a week ago. She was stronger, clearer, more certain of her own worth. She was no longer invisible. And her future, the real future, not the one Jackson had been toasting, was just beginning. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new loft in the French Quarter, watching the sunrise paint Charleston Harbor in shades of gold and rose. The brass keys to this place sat on my kitchen counter, simple objects that represented something profound, a life that belonged entirely to me. The divorce had moved swiftly once Patricia Willingham presented the evidence of my financial contributions to Jackson's business empire. Faced with documentation of nearly $2 million in loans, mortgage agreements on his office building, and proof of his affair, Jackson had little choice but to accept my terms. I kept the historic rice mill, my investment portfolio, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd reclaimed my dignity with grace. Jackson had tried to contact me several times in the weeks following his birthday party, leaving voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to resigned. I never returned his calls. There was nothing left to say to a man who'd spent 32 years taking me for granted and then celebrated his future without me. The scandal had rippled through Charleston society exactly as I'd expected. The story of the invisible wife who owned the venue, financed the business, and funded the party that excluded her had become legendary. Some people whispered about my dramatic entrance, but most expressed admiration for how I'd handled the situation. I'd exposed Jackson's hypocrisy without losing my own dignity, a delicate balance that Charleston's social circles respected. Camilla had resigned from Harrington Group the Monday after the party, though whether Jackson fired her or she fled, the embarrassment remained unclear. The waterfront project had stalled when several investors withdrew their support, unwilling to associate with the controversy surrounding Jackson's personal life. My children had been my greatest source of strength throughout the process. Miles and Clara had moved through shock to anger to fierce protectiveness of their mother. They'd witnessed their father's treatment of me for years without fully understanding its impact until they saw me claim my power that night at the historic rice mill. "Mom," Clara had said during one of our weekly dinners, "watching you walk into that party and take control of your own story, it was the most powerful thing I've ever seen." Aunt Odessa, at 83, had been predictably direct in her assessment. That man had the best thing that ever happened to him, and he threw it away for some young girl in a fancy dress. His loss, baby girl, his complete and utter loss. I'd kept my promise to transform the historic rice mill's booking policies. The venue now required full disclosure of all parties involved in events, and I'd instituted a policy of inviting property owners to make appearances at celebrations held on their premises. It was a small change that sent a larger message about recognition and respect. My mornings now began with coffee on my balcony, reading investment reports and planning my day around choices that belonged entirely to me. I'd returned to the art world, serving on the board of the Gibby's Museum and curating a small exhibition of Southern contemporary artists. The passion I'd set aside for Jackson's career had returned with interest. Some evenings I played Aunt Odessa's jazz records while cooking dinner for one, and the solitude felt like luxury rather than loneliness. I'd spent 32 years being half of something that never quite worked. Now I was whole on my own. The morning light reflected off my new keys, brass catching gold like a promise of possibilities still unfolding. I was 58 years old, financially independent and finally visible in my own life. Jackson had thought he was celebrating his future without me that night at the historic rice mill. He'd been right about one thing. The future was mine to claim. He just hadn't realized I'd already claimed it. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.